And in a very short period of time, the size of their head gets larger, the amount of bite pressure that they can make gets larger. They even grew new digestive organs called cecal valves, which no other species of this lizard in the world has these digestive organs. What they do is they create little pockets of fermentation in the gut, which allow the plant material to be digested better. Now, this means that basically the DNA of these little guys is completely rearranging itself based on the changes to the outside environment.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why a lot less people are getting brain tumors from cell phones now than they were like 10 years ago. I mean, that's just another possibility of what might be happening to us. Noticed if you ever saw that movie Super Size Me about the guy that was eating McDonald's every day.
Yeah, sure.
He started getting really sick, but then after 30 days, he wasn't getting as sick, and he was still eating the same stuff. Now, I'm not saying go out and eat McDonald's, but what I'm saying is you can analogize this thing about the lizard and take it to a much bigger level and say that the political changes that we're seeing and the exposure of the Illuminati type stuff, the earth changes and all this stuff that's going on, the economic upheavals and so forth, is creating pressure on us that will actually lead to evolution and the exact types of change that will be positive and adaptive for the future that we're all creating here.
Okay, this opens up the whole can of worms here, because what you're saying is that we're potentially then, and we don't know if this applies to humans, and you suggest that it does because of the findings in Super Size Me, etc. But this potentially could mean that even though that we as humans are living in an environment that is not, that it is not maximum adaptable to the way we're supposed to live, then we could potentially be changing because of that. I mean, if we live in an environment like a city where there is loads of Wi-Fi signals, that have been studies made on this, that this is damaging to your body, to your health. But are you saying that we could transcend this, so to speak, and actually become could live in this type of environment because of DNA changes?
I do. I mean, and I'm not saying that that's the main thing that we should focus on as part of this so-called Ascension or 2012 thing. But what I'm saying is that yes, another study that's similar is there's a typical plant that they use in laboratory experiments, and they mess with its DNA to try to get it to mutate, because then they study the mutation.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found over many, many years is that 15 to 20% of the time, when you remove the genes from the plant that would allow it to be proper looking, it replaces them. And yet we have no idea how or where it could get the information to replace that missing code. It's the same thing with the fruit fly.
Yeah.
You take fruit fly and you remove the genes that create the eyes, and yet no matter what you do, after 5 generations, the eyes come back on.
So that,
and there's nothing they can do to stop that.
And so that also means then that there's a difference between quote-unquote natural and artificial mutation, or even genetic modification, right?
Oh, yeah. I think natural mutation is largely a fluke. I don't think it happens anywhere near as much as they would say that it does.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that when you get an increase in radiation, that radiation seems to be what unzips the DNA molecule and allows code to get rewritten in unpredictable ways. So that's why, frogs and amphibians are starting to have the most mutation, because their skin is very porous and permeable, and they're in these areas where they're getting direct sunlight all the time, and the sun's radiation output is increasing, so you're starting to see weird mutations in frogs. But in general, I think that mutation is not very important to evolution. I think that most evolution is actually occurring based on a combination of intelligent patterns created by the galaxy as a massive information storehouse, and then secondarily by evolutionary pressure created by environmental change, which in turn stimulates the DNA into an adaptive response, thus rewriting its code. And those seem to be the two major things that are causing evolution.
Very interesting. And, my mind goes back to what Monsanto is doing. They're artificially, modifying crops and stuff like this. But what potentially could happen then is that eventually, after a period of time, this would actually go back into its natural genetic structure. We don't know exactly,
Absolutely. And, it's fascinating because I think the people on the inside are well aware of this fact. And I do believe that Jurassic Park is one of those insider movies where some of the information is being leaked. You remember in Jurassic Park that in order to get the dinosaurs to be breeding, they used frog DNA.
Yeah.
And they bred the dinosaurs to be sterile, right? And then what happens?
Yeah, they find a way to...
Somehow the DNA rewrote itself, and the dinosaurs are able to breed.
Right.
And that's when the whole thing went haywire.
Oh my God!
So this is nothing new. In fact, I'm going to give you something right now that I have never shared publicly before.
Right.
And it's fascinating. I was at a conference, and I won't say where because it'll make it more difficult for somebody to figure out who this guy is. I've had a few high-ranking black ops witnesses who were inside secret government projects who actually sought me out at conferences, and we sat down and would talk. And this guy knew a heck of a lot. And he told me about a lot of things, including Project Looking Glass, which I know you wanted to talk about, I talked about in the 2012 Enigma video.
Yeah.
Some of the information I got in that video came from this guy, who I call Clark. Mm-hmm. That's just the name I'm using. It's different than Daniel. This is a different guy than who I refer to as Daniel. Mm. So Clark, basically, he never told me what division of our secret government he worked in. If I had to take a guess, I'd probably say it's NSA, but I don't know that for sure because there's a big schism between NSA on one side and CIA on the other side. Mm-hmm. And NSA is kind of like the Rockefeller side, and CIA is like the Rothschild, the European side. Mm. So I think he was on the Rockefeller side. But anyway, he was talking to me about S4, which is obviously Area 51 is there. It's where the original reverse engineering of UFOs was being done. I think he said that a lot of that was being moved to Utah, if I remember correctly. Okay. But anyway, he said that at S4 they had this dog that everybody really loved, and the dog would go around between S1, S2, S3, S4, and wandered between these different buildings. And the dog had lots of little interesting quirks. Little personality quirks that it had learned as a result of interacting with the staff at these various bases. Mm. And then the dog died, and everybody was kind of bummed out about it. And because they had biological facilities at these laboratories, and they had much more advanced cloning technology than what's out in the open world, they cloned the dog because they wanted to, keep the dog around.
Right. Mm.
And then what they found was that the child, the new clone, did all the same behaviors that the original dog was doing, as if it was the same consciousness field. And then the new dog, the clone, would actually pick up new behaviors that the original one did not, and it would start to have more of a personality and more of a uniqueness. And then that dog died. And then they cloned that dog, and they came up with another dog, and this dog had all the behaviors of both parents, and then came up with its own behavior. And so what happened was, I guess they did this like 4 or 5 times in a row. Mm-hmm. And what they found was that each new dog had all the qualities of the others. And to me, what that suggests is, one of the things that they found out is that DNA is like an antenna to a non-local field. Yeah. And so the information that makes you who you are is through the whole cosmos, and your DNA just localizes that information into your body.
Fascinating.
But the information field that the DNA taps into itself can be intelligently structured with your personality. Mm. And this is really where reincarnation comes in, I mean, what you're basically seeing with these dogs is a form of reincarnation, and how the progenitor is in the DNA code and in the information field of that soul. Yeah. And it keeps building itself over time.
Okay, but how about this thought then, that because you were talking about bloodlines earlier, I had this idea that if it is true that reincarnation acts in this way, meaning that a family that are maybe not inbreeding then as the ancient Egyptian dynasties, but close to it, as many modern monarch families are, could it be that they have this knowledge and they actually know that if we keep the bloodline close like this, then the same people are actually going to incarnate through the same bloodline
Yeah,
again
I mean,
and again?
you raise a very good point by saying that. That's absolutely true. It does, in a sense, keep the DNA bandwidth narrow enough that you're probably going to get the same people coming up over and over again. It still doesn't mean that they're better than anybody else.
Sure, of course not. No. But this is
we all are part of the same source.
Of course, but they kind of
we all have our own gifts.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of tapped into this, and they know that in order to keep the power, to keep the wealth, and actually to come back and back and back to that same power and wealth, they can basically do like this. They kind of short-wired, they find a shortcut, so to speak. Here, I don't know what to term it, but
yeah, I'm going to be doing another radio show tomorrow, Law of Attraction Tools, with this woman Julie, and she just sent me an email reminding me that I'd forgotten I was doing 2 radio shows this weekend. But she said to me something like, "I'm looking forward to speaking with the most brilliant man in the world."
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, everybody has genius. Everybody is a genius in potential. And I feel that true genius is achieved when you begin to tap into your non-local mind more and more. And that really does involve unclogging the lower chakras, which can oftentimes be so captivated in greed and struggle and scarcity and fear that you don't have the ability to use that intellect that is tapped into the field. In other words, these lower emotions seem to be more a product of the body's consciousness rather than the energetic consciousness. Whereas things like intellect and reasoning and critical thinking seem to be much more a function of the higher intellect. So a lot of people's minds are actually stuck in repetitive loops. Think about this from your own life example. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the whole audience now.
Sure.
Somebody says something to you that hurts you. And I mean, it's like outrageously audacious. What the hell were they thinking when they said that? Think about how many times you might turn it over and turn it over and turn it over and turn it over in your head. You can't just say, wow, that was really unkind, and that person obviously is suffering, and so I don't need to take what they're saying as anything personal about me. Most of us don't really do that, or even if we know that we ideally would do that, we still get stuck in this obsessive looping thought.
Sure.
I can't believe they did. Oh my God, oh my God, over and over again.
Yeah.
And what actually happens is that some people are stuck in a state that the higher forces would call true helplessness, where you're just surfing from one of these to another, and you never get any downtime. The body requires 3 days to clear the stress hormones from a stressful event. If something happens that upsets you, you're not going to be able to really get balanced for about 3 days, because once your adrenals fire off and all those stress hormones come out, your body is wired to be in stress, and the best way you can handle it is to slow down and process and get quiet for a while.
Yeah.
And so many people's lives are so busy that they never slow down and get quiet, and therefore they never experience the contact with their intellect. So if you're out there listening to the show wondering why these higher forces so repeatedly say, meditate, 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 part of the reason is that you clear your body of these stress hormones. And then if you don't choose to react to things that happen from then on by getting stressed out, if you can choose to process your anger, then you may actually be able to get to a place where you're clear and you have some time to just think. And as soon as you are not blocked up with all those lower emotions, your own conscious mind, your own thoughts are going to be coming directly from the source, not from just something that you created, but your actual mind, what you think and feel, will be inspired by higher consciousness. And then when artists and musicians do this, we end up worshiping them as gods. But it's something we all can do when you get clear and when you just get away from that repetitive, obsessive, oh my gosh, look at what this person said and did thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And at that point, you also become more than just a vessel of your, problems, as it were, or you're a vessel of your worries, constantly, as you say, this feedback loop, and you never kind of really get out of that. David,
we put people in our